Welcome, everyone. My name is Afroditi Xydi. I'm an environmental engineer by training, so this discussion is extremely interesting to me. And if you've paid attention to today, you probably learned about 10 different technologies. So we're bringing a new one into the mix. And instead of me introducing offshore wind, I'm going to ask Mr. Herzog to give a brief presentation and tell us a little bit more about what is happening in offshore energy in general, and specifically in offshore wind. And I'm going to challenge you with a question, because earlier someone today said that they're not very bullish on offshore wind. So if you'd like to comment on that as well, thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Afroditi. And I'm Chaim Herzog, Chief Economist at BDO Israel, working over 25 years in the regional energy sector. And I'm happy here to announce that as of recently also a partner in BDO Advisory Greece, which with our joint venture with BDO Greece on working on economic aspects. And for many years, we have worked with leading regional companies within the offshore and energy market. We've worked with companies like EDF and Chevron, Energean on financial modeling, economic forecasting in energy projects in the Mediterranean. And I think to answer your question, when we are talking about the challenge of energy, it's always a triple challenge. We want energy source that is with low cost, we want low carbon, and we want high energy security. And in our view, we see the potential of offshore energy as an engine that allows to deal with those three targets. And I'll tell you why. Because at the end of the day, we have political challenges, we have geopolitical challenges, but we as economists always like to follow the money. And when we are following the money and we want to understand the economics of offshore power and offshore energy, we understand, yes, seemingly it's always cheaper to do on land. On land, the investment cost seems to be lower, but you have objections, you have neighbors, you have to adjust to your neighbors, you have the NIMBY not in my backyard problem, and when you go offshore, you can utilize economic to scale. And when you see what happened in recent years, how wind turbine cost decreased, and how the size and scale increased, allowing us to take care of economics to scale, you see that if we are able to deal with the offshore frontier, it's challenging, but it has economic rewards. And just recently, 2 months ago, the Trans-European Network set targets for offshore energy for Europe. It's non-binding targets, but they set a compass setting generation targets for offshore wind in the regions, also in the Mediterranean region. And yes, it's challenging for the Mediterranean. It's much easier in the North Sea. The North Sea, the water is shallow, the winds are strong, and in the Mediterranean Sea, the situation is difficult. And the cost accordingly is different. It's also different. Our modeling allows us to encompass the cost of depth and wind. And there are some countries in the Mediterranean, like Greece, like Spain, when we see the ability and the potential for low-cost wind, make it competitive. And I think to understand that and also address your question, when we want to understand should we and can we conquer the offshore frontier, I think we can learn from the lessons of oil and gas. Because up until 3 decades ago, offshore gas was limited, or gas and oil was limited to land, onshore, or shallow water. And in the last 30 years, we conquered the deep water frontier. And I think specifically in the Mediterranean Sea, we once thought we have no gas in the Mediterranean because the Mediterranean is a very deep water sea. And the first project that we did in Mediterranean offshore energy in 2004, it's now 20 years ago, was economic forecasting and modeling and project financing of the first Israeli Yam Tethys field. And today, we have many more activities and oil produced in the Mediterranean with technological advancement. Technology drives cost down drives economics. And when we analyze the potential for renewable energy within the Mediterranean, and look at the EU goals that were set just 2 months ago, we can see that regions like Italy and like Greece have the largest potential for offshore wind, which amounts to about 20 gigawatts. And when we talk about, okay, the significance of 20 gigawatts, renewable, can it really help not only for the economics, but for the third target I was talking about, energy security? And we believe that energy security for the Mediterranean area, part of that is being able for the region to produce its own energy, not be reliant on the imported energy. And the potential of the Mediterranean area, one, is wind, but also gas. We have, if you're talking about offshore energy in the Mediterranean, it's a combination. There is no silver bullet. We need to utilize all our Mediterranean sea sources, offshore wind, but also offshore gas. And we still need gas as a transition fuel for the next decades to provide energy security and energy storage for the region. We have just recently learned about potential significant discovery offshore Cyprus, the Electra field by ExxonMobil. And despite the regional challenges, we see the potential to develop those. So to answer the energy security part of the question, our view, or the question we were asking ourselves, can energy generated in the Mediterranean create energy security for Mediterranean bordering countries? Can Europe replace Mediterranean countries, replace the gas that they used to import from Russia in 2021 by energy that it produced in the Mediterranean? And we see here three anchors, three sources that if we combine them all, we can replace almost 80% of the gas that this region imported from Russia before the war. With the Mediterranean countries imported about 47 BCM. Out of 150 BCM that the EU imported, 50 BCM was imported to these countries, to this region. And we see three main projects here that together can replace almost all that gas and create lower cost energy with higher energy security and with lower carbon emissions. And those three projects are offshore renewables, along with the East Med gas pipeline project that has many geopolitical difficulties, but is becoming now more and more, I think, economically viable, which can allow us to import gas from the East Med, from Cyprus, from Israel to the European market. And the Great Sea Interconnector, which is electricity interconnect project connecting from Greece to Cyprus and continuing to Israel and creating a regional energy market. So I believe that this combination really can provide a different view of the potential.
Thank you very much. Very bullish, I see. And in combination with a few different technologies, not just offshore wind. And I think you mentioned one of the things that is one of the themes of today, how do we replace Russian gas, right? And I want to move to Greece and address a question to Mr. Papatsamatiu, who is the CEO of Eletaen. Talking about Greece, Greece has a diversified renewable strategy. We have a lot of wind, we have a lot of solar, but now we've launched our offshore wind program. Do you have any thoughts on the program that Greece has launched? It's aims for 2 gigawatts, and I think on this slide, Mr. Serdzok showed that the East Med and the Greek region has potential of at least 5.6 gigawatts.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you also for the question. Indeed, Greece has achieved a lot during the last 2 decades in terms of the progress that we have achieved for wind and photovoltaics and in general renewables. 2024, we produce almost 60% of our electricity production for our electricity consumption from renewables. And yes, we strongly believe that the next step will be, and can be beneficially be, the offshore wind. Of course, there are a lot of obstacles. In terms of the development and the policy developments of offshore wind in Greece, the truth is that we face delays. We are back from the program that we had planned, and this should create to us, give to us some significant lessons. First of all, the government needs to increase the resources allocated to HEREMA, which is the company in charge for the pre-development actions for offshore wind. And resources means both financial resources and human resources. This is important. The second is that all the actors, including the private and the public sector, should work a lot towards the implementation of the law that it has been voted 2 years ago. That means that we need to work in parallel with the preparation of the studies and the environmental studies foreseen in the law, and work in parallel with other engineering studies, data acquisition and data gathering, which is also very useful and important for the bidding, but this is, in our view, complementary to the main task, which will be the design of the auctions and the environmental licensing. The third, in order to have also an optimistic, the third point, in order to have also an optimistic message out of this. Yes, we face, as you told your question, we face a challenging period for offshore wind globally. This is not related, in our view, with the recent political development in the United States, but it is a trend coming from the past. We serve this sector for the last 3 decades. We have seen a lot of back and goes and a lot of up and downs. This is a part of the story. The direction will not change, so this delay that we see globally for offshore wind may be an opportunity for Greece as well, in order to cover the gap and to treat the delays that we have faced up to now, and to be ready and gain the time to be ready when the time occurs to have feasible investments and actual realization for our project in Greece.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Papastamateou. I think what you're saying is we need to be faster in Greece. Always.
If we try to be faster in Greece, we will manage to be in the normal course.
We can at least try. And I think you mentioned Herema specifically in your comment, and I'd like to address my next question to Ms. Karathanasi. Do you agree with what Mr. Papastamateou said in terms of the challenges that you're facing, and do you think that if you had more resources, things would move faster?
Thank you for your question. Actually, I agree with some part of your answer, Mr. Papastamateou. To be honest, indeed, Herema would need additional resources in order to run more efficiently its activities. However, I think we're in a very good track in terms of where we stand right now compared to the rest of the European, let's say, status of offshore wind. Indeed, these projects need the political leadership in order to move faster and forward. For example, we have submitted the national program almost 1.5 years, and until now, we don't have the, let's say, the formal approval of the national program through a joint ministerial decision. So this is a very critical milestone in order to move to the next steps. So in a nutshell, yes, it is good to have always additional resources in order to run our activities more efficient. But I think given the circumstances, we're in a very good point to move on and accelerate our actions in the future, in the near future.
Yeah, and to build on the last thing you said, can you let us know what you're planning for the future? What's coming? I think a lot of people are very excited about offshore wind. We heard in some of the previous panels that we also have a lot of foreign investors being interested in offshore wind in Greece. So what is the plan? What does that look like? Best case scenario, whatever you can control right now.
Okay. So under the current circumstances, the next step after the approval of the national program is to announce a public tender on the next level of studies that will be dedicated in the, let's say, regional level rather than the national level that was the national program. So this is the second phase of technical and environmental studies. We also move forward with the activities related to the centralized measurement campaigns, meaning that we will form very soon a special purpose vehicle for this aspect. And in the meantime, we are maturing our activities in order to expedite as soon as we are ready to move on with this. Another critical aspect is to communicate the plan, the wider plan, to the local communities. this with the collaboration with the ministry, we're planning to have some dedicated campaigns and workshops with the local communities at specific sites in order to provide clarity and transparency to what we are planning and we want to do in the future. So I think this is a very important aspect to, let's say, gain as much as support we can from the local communities. And if I may add, a third aspect is the supply chain. We want to have support and also reduce the cost of the projects. So this is very significant, very important for us to add value to the national economy and bring activities that can be supported by the Greek organizations into the offshore wind industry. Indeed, there are some companies that are already active in a global level, if I may say, but we also think that with proper upgrades and improvements of the local infrastructure, things can be very efficient in the future for the projects.
Thank you for that. And I want to build on your supply chain point and ask Mr. Papastamatiu a question. But if you'll allow me an impromptu question, because Mr. Herzog mentioned that onshore wind has a lot of pushback from local communities. What are your expectations in terms of the reaction of local communities for offshore wind? How do you think those conversations will go? Either of you can answer.
Look. My answer is the following. Yes, there are reactions against onshore wind. However, our understanding and our reading of the situation is that these reactions are not a characteristic for onshore wind. It's something typical and common for any kind of productive investment in Greece. So I don't expect that offshore wind will be an exception. We will face reactions also for offshore wind as we face with all other similar investments. Now, what does this mean? First of all, it means that we need the state, the government, and the sector to communicate and to inform accurately and continuously the local societies, because the reaction will be there, but the majority needs to have correct information in order not to support these reactions. The second is that we need to be very, very careful, and this refers both to the state and the private sector. We need to be very careful with the design of the projects, with the actual assessment of the impacts, with the minimization of the impacts, and we need to be proactive and take all the mitigation measures in order to have answers to all the reasonable questions. In this way, we will eliminate the fake news, and we will remain to discuss actual impacts on a real term with a scientific, robust basis. These are the two actions we need to make.
Thank you for that. And I'll go back to the supply chain point. I saw the report that the LETAEN has worked on in developing local supply chains for offshore wind for Greece. And tell us, do you think that there is potential? How much potential is there to create local industries and local jobs through the supply chain localization?
Yes, we have worked a lot on that, and our main task is to bring together actors and companies from different states. And I am very happy and I'm very happy to say that through all this work these years, we have gained some achievements. For example, already in Greece, we have steel companies constructing floaters or part of floaters for foreign investors. And this was also a result of the liaisons we try to make as association between foreigners and Greek companies. Obviously, there is the potential, and there are some critical parts of the supply chain which already exist in Greece. For example, the shipyards, the traditional with ports, the steel companies, the cables. Obviously, the exercise is not solved, and a lot remains to be done. And the competition, the global competition, especially the competition at global level, will be very strong. And in this view, we need to be also very vocal towards the European policies and towards and demand a fair treatment of our industry. Our industry, which will be the base to establish and to develop our local supply chain, face unfair competition for other countries which are not members of EU. This refers to steel industry, and this refers also to shipyards. So we need to work a lot, both on a business model, but also on a political lobbying towards the European Commission in order to achieve fair taxation and fair treatment of our industries.
Okay, thank you very much. And before I move on to Mr. Roberts' presentation, I'd like to ask Mr. Herzog, what is your view on the Greek program? Because you've worked all around the East Mediterranean and you have a lot of visibility. So how does the Greek program compare to other programs that you've seen, and how do you rate it?
So I think the challenge for any program to succeed is to create the right economic incentives and to prevent the regulatory obstacles. And I think the key issue here is planning, is gaining public approval, and creating a coalition. Because from our experience, the banking system, the business sector, knows and is able to finance these projects. The ability to raise money, if there is economic viability, the ability of the business sector to finance and build is existing. The side of the engineering part is also solvable. But the interaction between regulation and economics and engineering, removing the obstacles, enabling public acceptance, I think this is the key for success.
Thank you for that. I think you're new to Greece. Regulation here is something that exists, and we always try to find a way.
I think it's a challenge we're facing in every country. Every country thinks that its regulation is the worst. It's a challenge that we're facing everywhere. But
we could have a very long conversation about this, but let's keep the conversation focused to energy. And Mr. Roberts, I think you have a few insights around what's happening in the Caucasus region and the Caucasus, and specifically offshore wind being built in Azerbaijan and the geopolitical implications of that. I think you have a presentation as well.
First of all, there's a lot of statistics in all of this stuff, so the slides will be made available, and I'll skip doing, I won't mention them. Other than to say, first of all, Azerbaijan is serious both about expanding its gas production in order to meet its commitments to the European Union and in pursuing a renewables-based export policy. Problem for the gas, very simply, it costs a lot of money to develop the fields that would put the gas into the Southern Gas Corridor. So you cannot assume that there will be a massive increase in extra gas, certainly not by 2027, which was the original timeframe of the MOU. Then you've got the question of what is the capacity of Azerbaijan to deliver? Well, first of all, there's an awful lot of renewables projects that are actually underway. But the bottom line in this context is that if everything of all of this comes off, they will probably take about 1 BCM off the domestic Azerbaijani market. Just the minimal increase into gas available for export. So what happens in the future? Two things. They would seriously like to develop offshore wind. They have an enormous potential. Something like 157 gigawatts has been estimated for Caspian wind, of which 35 gigawatts would be in shallow water and 122 in deep water. They have looked at the question of how will they generate this, because you cannot import the windmills. The transport system is too difficult. So you have to start building them. And indeed, the port of Baku is in negotiations with contractors for the potential manufacture of wind turbine blades. But, and this is a very big but, how do you get it to market? The market is Europe. The system that they're looking for is a 3.9 gigawatt set of 3 cables that would transport the electricity across the Black Sea. But then you have to go through Georgia. And this is where the problem lies. Because the first project for a Black Sea cable is a Georgian project. Bear in mind, there are actually 2 projects. And the Georgian project is problematic for 2 reasons. The first, it's dependent on hydropower. Hydropower in Georgia means one dam in particular, the Anguri Dam, which supplies well over half of the country's hydropower. Problem? The control panel is in Russian hands, even though the dam is in Georgian control. Secondly, the water has been lower than expected. Thirdly, the Russians have not been able to deliver enough of their output to their local client state, Abkhazia. Indeed, it forced, amongst other things, the resignation of the last local Prime Minister of Abkhazia. You have a Russian client state at odds with Russia because of blackouts. And this is supposed to be the backup system for developing enough energy to export to Europe. Doesn't look terribly good. Then you've got the question, how much will it cost? Well, they did put a price on it, but that was a price before Georgia broke relations with the European Union. Why do I say broke relations? Not simply politically, but because the European energy community considers that Georgia has flouted its promises. And if you can't build the 1.3 gigawatt submarine cable from Georgia to Romania and Bulgaria, how can you build a 3.9 gigawatt system? So nobody doubts that there's a market for the electricity if it can get there. But I think all the promise of Azerbaijani wind is ruthlessly limited by the fact that Georgia in February 2025 is not the Georgia of last summer. Last summer, in August, and I'm coming to an end, the Italian feasibility study said, according to the Georgian government, that the project for 1.3 gigawatts was politically and economically feasible. The same company was due to give a presentation, was due to announce the feasibility study for the Azerbaijani 3.9 gigawatt. It went to COP. It announced some of the details of the project. It released further details in January. Significantly, it has made no mention of either the economic or the commercial viability of the project. Yes, physically it can be done. Yes, the energy can be put in. Yes, there is a market. But getting from producer to consumer, that's a very, very different question.
Thank you very much. I think we can conclude here because unless you want to make a comment on how, if this were to happen, if the cable was actually built, in fact, you said it's unlikely right now, but if were to be built, how do you think it would affect, you know, the offshore wind market in Greece, given that Greece has this strategic location as an interconnector between the east and the west, and we want to be an energy exporter to the rest of the region? If this gets built, obviously, you know, the part of Eastern Europe can have access to energy through this
The
cable.
first point is simply as an example. If one big offshore wind project on that kind of scale, delivering close to 4 gigawatts, were to come off, what would that tell the industry as a whole about the feasibility of what you can do elsewhere? I think it has a tremendous thing. Indeed, even the Georgian 1.3 gigawatt would do that. Not that it's offshore wind, but just proving large-scale electricity transfer under the sea was viable. The problem is, there are big plans, there's a lot of publicity going about it, and I don't think the publicity is justified.
Thank you. We'll end in the neutral note. I don't know that we started a very positive note. We're ending on a neutral. I don't want to label it as negative, but thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for your time.